not the whole saying.
You can be everyone ready?
Sure.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay. Well, on behalf of the PTSA and the Counseling Department, come on in. We welcome you to our first of hopefully several program for parents and guardians of our community. Thank you for joining us. We're grateful to be able to actually have program giving back in our school for the community. As you may know, this week is Red Ribbon Week. The Red Ribbon campaign serves as a catalyst to mobilize communities, educate youth, and encourage participation in drug prevention activities. Hope students have been involved this week in dressing up for Spirit Days. One of our partners in education, Chick-fil-A Lassiter, is providing coupon cards for a costume contest for Halloween, Say Boo to Drugs. So thank you, Chick-fil-A. The PTSA is incredibly grateful to have the support of our administration. We could not have done this without their support and dedication to our school. Unfortunately, we have several other school events, as you probably heard from Ann, going on now, and our administration is not able to attend. They send their apologies. Our program tonight will consist of our panelists educating us on their responsibilities and how they can help our community. And then we'll have a question and answer session with questions submitted ahead of time. We also have street sheets with QR codes floating around if you want to ask a question now. We have some at the back and then up here if you want to grab one if you didn't get one already. And this is also being recorded too. We'll try to get everything all the questions answered. We'll also have some time at the end if you guys want to come up here and talk to any of the panelists individually too. Thank you to our amazing counseling department. My co-chair for this program, Leslie Shearstone. Mrs. Shearstone is one of our professional counselors. Her team is committed to serving the Hope community with providing support, resources, and strategies for personal, emotional concerns, academic strategies, and future planning. As everyone knows, anxiety and depression are at all-time high. Our students have to go through so much in the past few years that we never did. We wanted to bring professionals to community to help educate us on what our students are dealing with, when to look for more help, and what to do if our students get in trouble with substance abuse. We are honored to have a panel of professionals joining us this evening. Anna Kennedy is the founder and the lead therapist at Elevate Counseling and Coaching in East Cobb. Ms. Kennedy works around the corner from Hope and is very up to date on the issues facing teens in our area. She will spend a few minutes to educate us on anxiety and depression, what trends she's seeing in the area, language to use with your students, and when to get help. Tony Ballrath, Assistant Regional Director of SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration for the Southeast. He has experience in mental health side, performance improvement coordinator, trauma program with Grady Health System, Northeast Georgia System. He has over 15 years in the hospital system with children and adolescents. Mr. Ballrath will educate us on what's going on at the national level, what support is out there, explain the new 988 line, and more. He's working to advance SAMHSA's mission and to grow the delivery of behavioral health services and health and human services in our region. Officer Jacob King, he's Cobb County Police Department Mental Health Crisis Response and Intervention Unit. He will explain what his team does and what he is seeing. Matt Danes is a licensed professional counselor, behavioral health clinician that works with Officer King to create Cobb County's first mental health response team. Mr. Danes will explain how this organization works and what he's seeing in the community. Both Officer King and Mr. Danes are part of the newly named Cobb PATH, Partnership for Assistant Treatment and Health Team. The goal of the Cobb PATH team is to provide the appropriate level of service and care for those experiencing problems like PTSA, mental health crisis, depression, poverty, homelessness, and or substance abuse with a stated goal of avoiding unnecessarily jail time or emergency visits. Now I'm going to turn it over to Anna Kennedy.
Okay, hi y'all. So can everybody hear me okay? Sometimes I talk really loud. My husband tells me to stop yelling at me, so voice modulation. I have 10 minutes to talk today, and I can geek out over this. Did you hear all the things that she said I was going to talk about? Like what anxiety is and how to treat it and what the symptoms are and how to talk to your child. So I'm going to do the best that I can, and I apologize if I talk too fast, but I've also had some caffeine today, so there's that. My name is Anna Kennedy, and I am the owner and lead therapist at Elevate Counseling. We have two locations. One of our locations is right around the corner at the Target at Johnson Ferry in Roswell. The So about 8 years ago, I was a school counselor. Yeah. The director of counseling at a small private school. And I loved what I did, but I found that there was only so much that I could do because I had so many students and we were seeing such big problems. So I went out on my own and I started a private practice, and I see your children, your adolescents, maybe not yours in particular, but East Cobb, I'm very intimately familiar with your children and what they see at Pope and what they're seeing in sports and social media and things like that. I have another practitioner who works with me. We're also hiring, so if you know any really good therapists, find me afterwards, please. That'd be great. Okay, so the first thing that you should know about anxiety. Well, I guess first thing is I have slides that I made because I geek out over this stuff, so I am going to look at this at some point to make sure. But okay, so first thing you need to know about anxiety is that it looks different on everybody, right? If you think about the different types, like in our diagnostic manual, there's generalized anxiety disorder, there's social anxiety, there's phobias, there's OCD, there's OCPD, and those are all different types of forms of anxiety. So I'm going to try and speak in generalities, but know that it can look very different on everybody. So younger children, typically their anxiety is focused on external things, like insects, monsters, the dark, something happening. And teenagers, it comes back more towards internal things, right? Like their body's changing, how other people perceive them. Actually, the top 3 anxieties that are being expressed to me are performance-based, so whether it be sports or academics, it's their bodies and it's how they're perceived by their peers, for sure. What should you look for in your children or your teens is a lot, okay? Irritability, marked change in behavior, sleep disturbances, heart racing, that's more like panic, heart racing, any kind of dizziness, any of them complaining about headaches, stomach aches, that's directly related to anxiety. However, so I can list all these: irritability, trouble concentrating, withdrawal from activities, avoidance of new situations, stomach ache, headache, drop in grades, school performance or school refusal, sleep issues, substance abuse, restlessness, fatigue. So those can all be symptoms of anxiety. However, the complicated part is those can look like other things as well. Fatigue can also be a sign of depression. Irritability could be a sign of them being a teenager. It could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be substance abuse. So what I do is I try and look for the deeper root, like what's really going on. We were actually just talking about the chicken or the egg as far as substance use and abuse versus anxiety or depression, right? Like oftentimes when I'm seeing substance abuse, it's a symptom of something deeper. It didn't start with, hey, I just want to get involved with drugs. It's, hey, I'm feeling sad, I am feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling this immense pressure, and so I started this thing and I got in over my head. So we have to get to the root of it. Also, more towards panic disorder, I just want to throw this out there because a lot of kids I'm seeing this more right now, is the symptoms of panic, heart racing, dizzy, numb fingers and toes, really stomach issues with that, sweating, dizzy, fear of going places, things like that. Make sense? Okay, excellent. Okay, so for the treatment where we go for anxiety is, the gold standard for anxiety and depression is cognitive behavioral therapy mixed with medication if cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't treat. So we don't immediately, at least in my practice, I am not against medications whatsoever. However, we don't typically start there. We start with cognitive behavioral therapy is basically your thoughts create your feelings, which then create your actions. So you can use this with your children. Like, what are you thinking about in order to have this, to elicit this feeling, or to show up, like to cause the way that you show up in the world? Medication is sometimes used, right, when the the depression is still there. But we do CBT here, and it teaches you different strategies to like think differently about certain situations. So if kids are worried about how they're being perceived, right? Like everybody's looking at me. Everybody's looking at me, and everybody notices everything, right? Like and they're judging me, right? First of all, why, even if they are judging you, how are you going to find out that they're judging you? Most people don't come straight up to you and be like, I'm judging you for this, right? I mean, I know some kids can be jerks, right? But most of the time you don't know of their perception. And then number two, like, what does it actually matter? Like, if that person does judge you, do you want them in your life currently? And then, I don't know, so it's just changing, again, I get really excited about all this stuff, but it's changing the way that people see certain situations and the way that they think. One other example would be, like, no one likes me, no one sees me, no one cares about me. Does anybody hear that with their kids sometimes? Yeah. Okay, so when I say it like that, it's like, man, no one cares about me. Like, that must be terrible. We'll change it around to like, no one cares. That's amazing. Like, people actually care about you, but no one cares what I'm doing. Isn't that freeing? Does that make sense? I go. Also, with depression and anxiety, so I'm bouncing back a little bit, but you can ask your children to figure out what they're dealing with, right? Like, if I were to take your anxiety away, if I pull it away and it goes away completely, would you still have depression? And most of the time, what I'm seeing right now is that they wouldn't. It's the fact of feeling so pressured, and this uncomfortable feeling of anxiety is causing the depression. Has anybody, well, you don't have to like raise your hand, but anybody who's experienced anxiety before, it's tough. It's tough. And our kids right now are facing a ton of it. And even when I have kids that say, like, my parents don't pressure me in school or for academics. However, the pressure is still there whether you're doing it or not, right? Like the pressure to get certain grades, to get Hope Scholarship, the pressure with that we're giving them in, in 6th and 7th grade, that they have to choose their ACE classes, is that right?
They take tests to try to get into them.
Yeah, 6th and 7th grade, like that's a lot of pressure. And not to say that we should do anything different, but just to be aware that kids are facing a lot right now. Also, social media. man, they are faced with, I mean, they have to be on at all times. Legitimately, I would say, like, take the phone away. They don't have to be, they don't need to be accessible. But do you remember, like, we could actually go home and not know what everybody else was doing and not feel left out. And then also, if our children don't respond fast enough, or they don't open their Snap, or they leave somebody unopened or unread, right, then they get criticized for that. So our kids have to be on a whole lot. There was a question about screen time that was given. Mm-hmm. Should I address it?
Sure.
Okay.
Which my computer, just by the way, has just decided it's going to do some updating in the middle of our presentation. So I really am sorry that I won't be able to access if you are going to send me some questions. But there was a question of someone that had asked, it was about just the social media and the screening and how that impacts their child and how they could work with them on that.
Yes, screen time. What I would say, well, first of all, you can do a quick Google, right? Like, you can do a quick Google and find out all the things that happen chemically within their brains what changes it, right? Like, I have a 4 and 7-year-old, and without even Googling what screen time does to them, if I give them 45 minutes of screen time, they are different children when they are done. I mean, they're lovely beforehand, and then I give them a screen, and they're like these little demon like, what are those, gremlins? Is that what those things are called? Yeah. So I see it with that. But let's just think practically, right? The amount of time that kids are spent on their phones, that they're not sleeping, probably. They're not getting enough sleep. They are faced with comparison. It's what everybody else is doing, and who looks better than this, and what these people are doing. So just think about that, like practically. And I'm running close on time, so. But the screen time, sometimes when parents say that their kid is addicted to their phone, I believe it. I fully believe it. There's a whole cycle that you can read about, like the dopamine cycle, addiction cycle. But what I would say to you, and I think that most of us are in the age of like cigarettes, like if your child, meaning that was a like popular thing, right? If your child came home with a pack of cigarettes and was like, yeah, Mom and Dad, I'm gonna smoke. I'm gonna go upstairs and I'm gonna smoke my cigarettes. What would you do? Would anybody be like, sure, see you later, go for it? No? I mean, you don't have to admit it here, it's totally fine. But the answer is, or the question is like, why would you not allow them to take their cigarettes upstairs? It's because the research has been done that it is harmful. We know that it causes negative health effects, right? Lung cancer, all the things, right? The research is out there about screens. I'm not saying that your children need to be without screens by any means. And I am not popular with my kids when I tell them that their parents should take their phone away at 10 p.m. But I fully, if you know that something is harming your child, even though everybody else does it, just think that through. Okay, perfect. I will get off my soapbox on the screen time. Now, how do you talk to your children? I'm going to skip past this a little bit, but I think everybody received this handout, like Healthy Lifestyles, which I did not put together by any means, but just listen to your children. Listen to your children. Talk to them. If you see a marked change in behavior, like, hey, Ben, I've noticed this about you. What's going on? You want to talk about it? And they're going to be like, no, Mom, everything's fine. No, Dad. Like, okay, but I've noticed that you A, B, and C, like you're more irritable with me. Like, let's just talk. And it's not a fight, right? But listen to your children. Because sometimes they just want to be heard. And also, as a mom who wants to fix things, oh man, when my kid comes home upset, I want to fix it, right? But sometimes the question is like, how can I best support you right now? Like, what is it that you need from me? Because sometimes they just want to talk and vent, and they just need to be heard, and they don't need us to come fix it for them. But yeah, so moving forward from that. My trends, what I'm seeing in East Cobb right now. Anxiety. Yes. I am not trying to be an alarmist here. Every single adolescent that I see, and that's most of my practice, is dealing with some form of anxiety. It might not be the presenting problem. It might not be the main thing, but there's a lot of anxiety happening right now. Yes, I'm seeing depression as well. As far as the kids that I'm seeing, yes, vaping. I'm going to let the professionals really get more into that. Vaping, yes. But I wanted to address something that I am seeing with our kids is our kids who smoke weed. And I'm going to do this with quotes because and some of you may be familiar with this, and I'm sorry if you are, but just listen for a second. Our kids are talking about carts. Have you heard this word? Okay, it's referring to a marijuana cartridge. And they can look at different things, they can look different ways, but oftentimes they appear as vape. Okay? There's 3 types that I'm aware of. And again, this is just me asking our kids, what are you doing? And I've actually had to learn, like, I can't be like, do you smoke weed? I have to say, how do you take your marijuana? Because then they'll find a way around it, like, no, I don't smoke. Because they're not actually lighting it up, right? Same thing with nicotine, y'all. Can't be like, hey, are you using tobacco? Like, no, I'm not. It's nicotine, right? But the cards that I'm seeing is the legal kinds that are actually not legal in the state of Georgia, but that are sold in different states at dispensaries that are monitored by whomever, right? I don't think it's FDA, is it? I don't know the answer to that. but it's monitored by somebody, I think. The second is carts that they're buying from dealers, just like anybody would buy anything else from a dealer. Like, the problems with that is, what is in that? We don't know. It's supposed to be marijuana oil or THC oil, but there can be other additives, ingredients in that, so there's dangers to that. Finally, which most of my East Cobb kids are doing, is they're finding these carts at gas stations locally, which is, they're calling marijuana, but what actually it is, it's a Delta 8 version of THC, but basically it's a synthetic oil. Guys, it's not good. Do you remember when the bath salts were a thing? Does anybody remember that? Yes, yeah, it's like that. It's very dangerous. It's not regulated. You don't know what's in it. So if your kids, or if you talk to them about buying a cart from a gas station, please don't. Don't let them. There's a Chevron at the corner of Paper Mill and Johnson Ferry. She said, amen. I know that one. Don't let them go there. Okay, I think that's like what I have right now. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anna. And again, I apologize, my computer is only at 16% updated, so there's something around the county update.
I think if you want to ask a question, you can write it on that piece of paper and raise your hand, and Mary or I can come get it if you don't want to ask it in front of everybody.
I'll ask you a question real quick. Now, you mentioned that you're seeing higher rates of anxiety and depression. Like, how much higher, right? Is it 3 times more you saw 3 years ago, 2 years ago?
Well, yes, it's probably 3 times more. But 3 years ago, we hadn't gone through COVID. And COVID was terrible for a lot of reasons, but one great thing that came out from it was, which I believe, is that people started talking about their mental health, and it's become less stigmatized. There's different ways to get therapy. So I'm unsure of whether I'm actually seeing more anxiety, or if it's just you're allowed to speak about it now. It's okay to have anxiety, depression, and talk about it, and it's just become a bigger part of the conversation. Yeah.
That's a great question, though.
Thank you. You can pass it
Yeah.
on to
You might have an answer to that.
Do I need to use this? Can you guys hear me or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I put this down there?
Yeah,
I
it's
think
fine.
the
Yeah,
microphone.
I think I was too loud.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not used to this audience, so I'm a little freaked out. It's kind of weird. I'm used to like clinicians and academics and stuff like that. So, my name's Tony. I do work for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Who's familiar with SAMHSA? Yay! People actually know of us.
Yeah, they can't hear you. In the
Okay, I'll use this thing. It's so big. All right, are we good? All right. So prior to SAMHSA, I spent about 12 years working in inpatient behavioral health systems with, children, adolescents, and young adults. So I do have that aspect of my career, and then I have my federal side. And I'll be honest with you, I think for what we're talking about, I'm probably going to wear both hats. So just bear with me. I'm not nearly as structured. I don't have slides. I just have a few notes. And so I can't speak to our local community because I have to deal with federal data that looks at state and regional trends. So I cover 8 states in the Southeast. So I can't really get into the nuts and bolts like you're doing with the county level stuff locally. Show of hands, who thinks that adolescent, I guess we'll just say youth mental health was doing fine before the pandemic? Well, thank God we're all like on the same page, right? It was really starting to go downhill even in the 2018, 2019. If you look at the federal data from the surveys, and everybody does a survey, my agency does one, CDC does probably 50 million. Like there's all kinds of people that do the surveys. But the commonality was that adolescent behavioral health was already starting to go down in 2019. So that's the big thing there. I am going to pick up on what we were just talking about earlier before we started, which is a common question I get asked is, does substance misuse lead to depression, or does depression lead to substance misuse? All right, easy answer, it depends, right? Some folks are like, they have a genetic trait that kind of predisposes them to either one. I will tell you, I'm going to wear my inpatient hat right now. A good case example that we were just talking about earlier is I had a young man, obviously not going to mention his name. I did speak with his mom and said, hey, I'm going to talk about this, and she said, that's fine. Lived in a rural community in the state of Georgia. I met him when he was 16. He was admitted to our inpatient unit, and the primary diagnosis was basically a substance use disorder. And so in speaking with the family, they were just insistent that we focus on getting him off those drugs, right? Drugs, get him off the drugs. Met with the young man and asked him, several questions, just the initial screening as we were doing the treatment plan. And, screamed of depression and anxiety, right? Talked to the family again, oh no, he's not depressed. Well, have you asked him? Oh, he's not depressed, he's the most popular kid in school. He's a gifted athlete, and honestly, the kid is a freshman in high school, had scouts looking at him for baseball. Good kid, solid arm, competitor. He was a very popular kid in school. It was a small community. He was the life of the party. But when I was talking with him during some of our one-to-one sessions outside of the group, he explained that he just did not feel confident or capable of talking with other kids or adults if he wasn't messed up. And so, where do you guys think he got most of the drugs that he was using? Any takers? Yeah. Medicine cabinets. Leftover meds. He emptied his house, went to his friends' houses, got them from friends, got injuries, sports injuries to get docs to prescribe. And he used most of his medications that he was taking, illegally obviously, in the evening hours. So I started asking that question, well, why at night? Because my mom puts my sisters down to bed, and then she goes to bed, and I'm all alone, and I hate being alone. Why do you hate being alone? Because I don't like my thoughts. I'm not comfortable, and I'm miserable. Talking to family again. Are you sure you don't want to talk about, our family stuff? We keep focusing on the symptom, which is the substance misuse. They kept insisting that was not the issue, that his issue was not depression. So I'm going to fast forward. He ended up continuing down that path. We saw him several times. He ended up violating his probation as an adult and ended up serving some time. And unfortunately, after that situation, ended up with a horrible girlfriend situation. He was doing well, gainfully employed, working as a veterinary tech and going to a community college, I think somewhere in Tennessee. But the relationship continued to be taxing for him, and he relapsed with opioids and had an accidental overdose and died at the age of 23. So I think it's certainly one of those things that I'm certainly not saying that that's relevant here, other than talk with your kids. Ask them questions. Don't assume that you necessarily know. And I swear, as God is my witness, they thought they were doing the right thing, but that family really missed the boat on the fact that he was depressed. They were telling him he wasn't, but he struggled. And if they caught it early enough, they might have been able to prevent some of that from happening. So it's a tragic situation. Unfortunately, that's not the only story that I have. It's just the only one I'm going to share. So it is a definitely a big deal. And talk to your kids, know your kids, find out what's going on with them, and like we were saying earlier, be willing to listen. Sometimes they want to be heard and not necessarily helped. I will jump real quick into some stats. Youth mental health was declining, like I said, before the pandemic. In 2019, more than 1 in 3 high school students in the U.S. reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. That's a 40% increase over 2009. So again, I don't have local data, but 40% across the board, that's a pretty good number. 2019, approximately 1 in 6 youth also reported making a suicide plan in the past year. That was a 44% increase over 2009. So trips to the emergency room for depression and anxiety, that was up about 30% between 2009 and 2019. Now, if you want to get into the accidental overdose range, we are at an all-time high of over 100,000 deaths, which is horrible. 2019 is again where we were hitting that plateau, and then the pandemic hit. I will tell you, like in present time, the accidental overdose deaths for the adolescent population is worse than any other population we have age group wise. And I'll be happy to share any of this stuff outside of here. You guys can, honestly, you guys can have my email and phone number, and we can chat about any of that. So the pandemic, it just accelerated a bad situation. It just made it worse. It exacerbated it. So post-pandemic surveys that are coming out have indicated that 37% of youth experienced poor mental health during COVID-19, and that 44% of youth experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness during the past 12 months. So that's our current data. Emergency department visits for behavioral health are up about 31% across the nation. That's a pretty good number. And inpatient hospital rates for youth between 12 and 18 are up by 60%. So hospitals are staying busy. You may not realize this, but we also have a ginormous provider shortage going on right now in mental health, especially here in the Southeast. And that's a lot of what I've been doing recently. These folks will tell you, I've been traveling. I was in New Orleans and North Carolina this week. I can't even keep track sometimes. And a lot of that is looking at what we can do to strengthen the behavioral health workforce at clinic sites and just getting people in the pipeline to get interested in a profession that desperately needs some workers. So a couple things that happened during the pandemic. Social distancing, obviously an issue, even for some of us, right? Virtual learning didn't help. I didn't even like teleworking, I'll be honest with you. It affected me, right? And so think of youth that are not fully developed brain-wise. I mean, they've got that situation point where things are still baking, and it was hard for them to cope with some of that stuff. We're also putting a lot of pressure on kids to be grown up, and they want to be grown up, right? So even if they're not, they're going to project that they are, that they're way more mature than they are. And so there was a lot of stress going on during the pandemic. And when we kind of did the isolating thing, we kept kids from getting those social connections, right? Even if they started that, coming into high school, we weren't able to maintain some of those social connections face to face. And those are protective factors against depression and anxiety. So being connected to people is a protective factor. And when you take that away, it put kids at risk. Who thinks social media has been an ally for us in the field of mental health? If you raise your hand, I'm going to leave right now. So, and I will even say on top of that, SAMHSA just funded, I want to say, the American Association or Academy of Pediatrics. We just gave them $2 million to set up a center of excellence specifically related to social media and the impacts on youth. And so it'll look at the pros and cons. They're going to be objective and look at both. Once we get those links, I will make sure that you guys get that, because that is an important center. I think it's a 5-year funded. I think they'll probably get a couple $1 million each year to do that. So we do know that social media is an issue. It is on the presidency and the agenda. I work for the government, full disclosure. I don't agree with everything the government does. They just pay my paycheck, right? So with that being said, I do support that. I think this is at least an administration that is doing some work in the field of behavioral health. And I think it'll be interesting to see what the social media studies come out looking like. I had to take a break personally. I mean, it was a mess. I was just getting frustrated, and we're used to just instant gratification and instant knowledge of what's going on. And sometimes the information out there isn't right. It's not accurate. So that was also a problem. And we've entered an age where some of our polarizing politics, are front and center, and our youth get to see that too. So we're kind of in a weird space right now. So you can't blame it all on the pandemic. The pandemic just sort of accelerated what was already going bad, and now it's just up to us as a society to sort of fix that. And this is not what you want the government doing. The government does a good job of funding it, but I'm just going to tell you right now, you don't want them getting into how it happens. Yeah, this is the same government that can't figure out how to fly me to Chattanooga without me going through Houston, Texas first. That is not who you want fixing your mental health problems in the world. And I say that as a SAMHSA employee. This is a community problem. Government can support it. We can certainly help you financially, but we do offer a lot of I would say technical assistance, and I will talk about that for a minute. On my side with SAMHSA, we fund a lot of TA centers. One of them is the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center that is based here at Emory, and it has an entire school-based mental health component. So there's a lot of public-facing information that might be of interest for you guys. Certainly for school administrators, we fund aware grants that help communities, get mental health into schools and get it front-facing. We have a lot of different TA things that I can share with you guys outside of this.
And we have a lot of that on the counseling website already, so
Cool.
we'll talk about that in a minute.
Lots of brochures if you want to look at printables and things like that. The SAMHSA website has a lot of those that are free downloads. If there's print materials you want to order, it is free. It's your tax dollars at work, right? Might as well get something out of that. They will ship it directly to your house. It just takes it a few weeks, for them to get there. I will say, mental health issues do go hand in hand with youth. You can get on a slippery slope if you ignore it. The good news is most of the time it's episodic. It doesn't necessarily have to be a long-term thing. But if it's ignored, it can lead to all kinds of things. It can lead to substance misuse. And you can get into some risky behaviors. So I guess my advice, if we're going to call ourselves professionals, would just be nip it in the bud. Ask questions, be involved. Be willing to hear some things you don't want to hear, and be willing to accept that maybe things aren't okay. And is it okay to not be okay for a little bit as long as we're kind of heading down the right path? I think it is. And I think that's a fundamental shift in America from where we were before. Before, a few years ago, we didn't want to talk about mental health. You didn't hear athletes and actors and actresses talking about their mental health issues. So I think there is still some stigma out there. I think it's getting better. But we each have a responsibility to make sure that we're doing our part and that we're modeling some good behavior as well. The only thing I will mention as I close is 988. We transitioned the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline from the 1-800 number to 988 back in July, I think July the 16th. So if you haven't heard of 988, you can Google that. There's lots of print material. I will gladly answer questions on that as well if I need to. You guys might be talking about it. The big thing for us for 988 as the funders is we want to make sure that people have the ability to call, text, or chat 24/7. The big shift, which is really where the money went, is making sure that local centers are having the capacity to answer the call. So before, I could call from Georgia and I might get transferred to a call center out in Colorado, right? There's a higher chance of that happening because there weren't enough call centers in the States. So the money has gone to standing up more call centers and increasing the capacity. So if the lines are busy, there might be a chance that I get rolled over to another center, but there's a higher likelihood that I'm going to get somebody in Georgia that recognizes Georgia landscape and knows the resources. So I'm not going to get into any more. It sounds like you guys have that. So 988 is huge for us.
Yeah, I ordered a lot of that, but it's taking a couple weeks, so we're gonna have that in the counseling office and we can send it out too. So it'll be here hopefully sooner than later.
And there are printables as well on our 988 site. And like I said, anybody that wants to connect, when we're done here, I'll gladly exchange some info and we can go from there. So I rambled a little bit, but that's about all I have.
All good stuff, thank you. Pass it down the line.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? All right, I'm Jacob King, I'm with the California Police Department, and I'm currently assigned to our PATH team. So in a nutshell, what we deal with is mental health crisis response and intervention. And that's a fancy way for saying we deal with the crisis as it happens, and then we're trying to prevent additional crisis in the aftermath. And I could obviously speak for quite a bit of time about all of the nuances involved with that, but tonight we're going to focus more on what we're seeing. And I'll be completely honest. Within our role and the way the mental health system is set up in the United States, we do not deal with juveniles nearly as much, and that's for primarily one reason. As a juvenile, whoever has parental guardianship or custody of the child makes decisions, whether that's medical or mental health. So a child in crisis, if the parent says, you are going to the hospital, they are going to the hospital. There is not, as we as adults have the right to refuse, children don't have that. Okay, so we realistically as a team, we don't see juveniles in crisis as often, and when we do, it is usually the more severe of the cases. There's typically some really bad things either happening or getting ready to happen. But what I can say is that there is a nexus between what your children are going through or starting to experience now and the outcomes. Okay, things like depression, anxiety don't just start overnight. There's a process. There's things that go on, things that happen, and the unfortunate part is that when they become disorders and when they become problematic, it's because the successful treatments or the positive treatments have been ignored, right? By the individual, by parents, etc. So anxiety seems to be a key concern here. And that, unless somebody in this room can figure out some way to put social media back in the Pandora's box, it's not going to go away. Right? Let's just be realistic. There's too many people making too much money off of social media for us to ever say we're going to put it back and we're going to get rid of it. Okay? It's not going to happen. So what you as parents need to do is to understand that you have a role in monitoring what goes on online, right? Just like you monitor what goes on in your house, in your vehicles, you have an obligation to monitor that on social media. And I know that kids have become very tech savvy, and in many cases they outpace us 3 or 4 steps ahead, okay? But at the end of the day, all of those devices are connected to one thing that they can't outpace, the paying account, right? The internet, the cell phone, right? That all comes out of the parent's account. That's all linked into them. Most kids in high school, maybe there are some exceptions out there, but most of them are on our plans, right? I have 2 in college, and they're still on my cell phone plan to this day, right? So I'm waiting for that break in my bills somewhere down the road, okay? But that gives you, as parents, control, okay? If they're unwilling, or you feel they're being evasive, or you think they're engaged in activities that are inappropriate online, turn the phone off, right? That's your right as a parent. That's your obligation. Turn it off. And they're not going to like it. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be fun. And they're not going to come back the next day and say, gee, Mom, gee, Dad, that was great that you did that for me, right? But somewhere down the road, they'll look back, as I did a few years ago, and go, thank God my parents cared enough to get involved, okay? So anxiety. One of the things that it can lead into, obviously, is depression, right? And depression can lead into suicidal thoughts. And this is something that has become a big topic for a lot of areas. First responder, military, the general public, right? Suicide has become problematic. One of the things that I would say is that if you have a child, and because we see this a lot with families, and this is from our experience, typically been with adults, but I'm sure it would apply to children as well. If you have a child that's experiencing or expressing suicidal thoughts, okay, you have got to be comfortable talking about it, okay? And I see veteran police officers that freak out when somebody starts bringing up suicide. I've seen therapists, counselors, psychologists, right? Everybody wants to freak out when someone says the word suicide, okay? We like to use euphemisms. Are you planning to hurt yourself? No. If you believe that your kid is having those types of problems, you need to be comfortable enough to talk to them, and then you need to get them in contact with a professional, okay? Too often, if you try to use the pretty language, right, you try to dance around the topic, they're going to pick up that you're not comfortable talking about it. If you're not comfortable talking about it, they're not going to be comfortable talking to you about it, okay? And that's something that obviously no parent wants to hear. They don't want to have that conversation with their children, but it might be the one that changes the path they go down. It might be the difference between them becoming successful, right, and living a productive life, and like the story this gentleman talked about, right? So be comfortable talking to these things, and it's not just suicide, it's mental health in general, it's the anxiety. You have to be comfortable talking it. And I'll leave with one last thing on the whole social media thing, because I know that's kind of become the demon in the room, right? And I would agree in a lot of ways. For every good thing social media does, it probably does 10 more that are bad, okay? If we expect, and this is something that I use daily in dealing with people in crisis, right? If I expect to tell somebody to calm down, okay, I have to model that behavior, right? If you're going to tell your children, you need to be on your phone less, you need to get outside, or you need to get off the computer, you need to stop watching TV, or whatever it is you're going to tell them, you can't do that if you're being a hypocrite. You can't pull up your cell phone and check your email and your Facebook status and post something on Instagram while telling your child to get off the phone, right? You've got to model those behaviors. for them. They've got to see that, oh, okay, mom and dad aren't just telling me to do it because they want to give me a hard time. They're doing the same thing, right? And for many of us in here that, to some degree or another, that may be challenging, right? Because it's been one of those things that has kind of infiltrated its way into every age group. It's not just teenagers, it's not just, young adults. People my age, people older, right, all have those same issues with being connected, overly connected on social media. And if we're all honest, most of what's on there is just a hot mess of garbage. It's people with opinions that no matter how many fact check stickers they have next to their title, they're not fact checked. It's their opinions, and most of it's nonsense, right? But for some reason, it's thrilling nonsense, and we're all addicted to it, okay? Our children too. So we've got to model behaviors that we want them to engage in. And as parents, that's your primary role, right? It's not always going to be easy, it's not always going to be fun, but that's why you're here, okay? I'm going to leave it at that, and then again, I will be available for questions afterwards as well.
Hello, my name is Matt Dames. I'm a licensed professional counselor with Highland Rivers Behavioral Health, and I've been working with Officer King on the PATH team for the past 2 years. Those of you who aren't aware, Cobb Community Service Board, I've been working with them for the past 15 years, 16 years now, and we've merged with Highland Rivers, so it's the same organization, we just changed the name because we're now part of a larger organization covering 13 counties. I've been working with Officer King and the community for the past 2 years, and I'm just going to explain what we do in general so that you guys are aware that this is a resource here in Cobb County. You've heard on the news about, we don't need to send police to 911 calls. How about just send mental health therapists or clinicians out instead? Well, there's always safety reasons. There's all kinds of reasons why it may not be a good idea to just send a mental health professional. So what happened over the course of the years is a concept called a co-responder team, where a law enforcement individual, such as Officer King, rides with a mental health professional, such as myself, and we respond to the crisis together, so that there's a security element there. There's someone there that can, pacify the situation if necessary, calm things down. We do a lot of de-escalation when we're out on scene, so it's not that when police officers show up to a mental health scene, it's going to be a fight or something like that. Here in Cobb County, we've been training our officers something called a crisis intervention team training, where officers are trained to understand what mental health is, what to look for, what to expect, and to understand, even if they're not going to be a professional, to research it further, so that they can understand that's something that's out of the ordinary, and I need to get a more knowledgeable person on scene to deal with this situation, which is where calling a team such as ourselves out. Now, 988 here in Georgia, we had the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. That was the 800 number to call for suicidal persons or mental health crisis in general. Those numbers was moved over to 988, so it's the same offices here in Georgia. They're just now picking up those calls under the new number. They can send mobile crisis teams out, but if they go out on scene and someone has a knife and they've been cutting on themselves, they may not go in the house and call police backup. So officers are going to be involved. So having crisis intervention training for officers means that they're more knowledgeable and that they can interact with people having these type of crises in a more safe manner. We go out to respond to 911 calls. We have 2 teams here in Cobb. They cover the entire county. We have one team is myself and Officer King. We have another team with Officer Hurtado and another LPC with Highland Rivers called name's Kevin Elmore. That we cover the entire state. I mean, not the entire state, the entire county. And even with just us, It's, we're picking up hundreds of calls a year now. What's the number now?
Just short of 300 crisis calls since the first of the year.
First of this year, we have over 300 crisis calls that we've been responding to. And we are able to de-escalate most of them. 1 out of 4 crisis calls results in me having to sign the Form 1013, which is the state involuntary hospitalization form, where we have to force someone into a hospital because of their issues. Usually, 3 out of 4 calls are able to de-escalate the situation, get them to agree that they need to start taking care of themselves, they need to start getting some help, and we start connecting them to resources. On top of these crisis calls, we're also going back out and talking to friends and family that they're willing to let us talk to, talking to the patient themselves, and encouraging them that this is a serious issue that they need to start dealing with. And there's just resources out there. It might be the community service board, if they have insurance or they have family with insurance, they need to be looking into those. But we go out and we continue to encourage these people that there's resources out there, there's help out there that they need to just start using. And we also educate families who may not understand. Why is my son, why is my daughter dealing with these issues all of a sudden? I never realized this. They may not have been. You may not have been aware that some of these issues occur. They were talking about the different signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression, how sometimes they look different in youth as opposed to adults. Some of those things that you just need some education on, and there's groups out there that can help you educate. Internet, some of it's good, some of it's not, but sometimes, even just starting there, we can put you in right directions as where you can start educating yourself on understanding, especially scary terms. If you take your child and start them on therapy, understanding what therapy is, understanding what some of these terms are, like what's bipolar, what's ADHD, what's oppositional defiant disorder, all these kind of things, understanding what those mean. Some of that stuff you can educate yourself on. Some of those things you might need support groups which are out there that can help families, parents understand, so that they can start interacting with the patient a lot better. And once again, I work with Officer King Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, so I can help. I'll be here to answer further questions.
And the computer is actually updated, so if you do want to ask a question, a QR code, it's available now.
Yes.
Or if you just want to ask a question, just ask a question.
But I'll go ahead and I'll address some questions to our panel. In the one here that says, suggestions to help a teen who refuses help. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
I can just speak in general.
Yeah, we see that a lot, unfortunately.
So refusing help is probably the #1 problem in mental health. Admitting you have something, and we deal more with adults, which is typically where we're seeing things like schizophrenia, bipolar, various mood and personality disorders. Admitting to that is scary, right? Imagine if you woke up tomorrow and somebody said, hey, essentially your brain is not working right, and so everything that you believe, your input, your outlook on life is all wrong, and you need to take these pills, and you need to go listen to somebody tell you how you should think, right? Most of us would be terrified by that. We'd reject it because it's our reality. So when you come to trying to deal with someone that's refusing help, very often what we see is families and friends want to force it, right? They want to, take the person to the hospital and force the drugs down their throat. Well, that doesn't happen. Even if they're involuntary admitted, they're not going to be force medicated. If they're combative, they can be sedated, but that just means they get a good nap and they wake up in the same condition they were before, right? My suggestion would be, rather than trying to confront, trying to force, and trying to, immediately go on the offensive, try the encouragement role, right? Look for something in that person's life that encourages them. A lot of times what we see, and maybe it's a little bit easier because we're third parties and we're a little bit more objective, we're not down in the middle of all of the disputes and arguments that have gone on in some cases for years. Look for something in that person's life that they hold important. Many of them want independence. They want to be self-sufficient. Use those things as incentives, right? It's kind of like the old, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, right? So if you can find an approach or something where you're encouraging and giving them choices, giving them options, right? Letting them be part of that process. And again, this isn't 100% guaranteed, but that's the approach I would start with first, right? Rather than what we typically see is, you've got problems, you need to fix yourself, you need to take medication, or I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z, right? That's the last ditch, right? That's, everything else has failed. That's the last ditch effort. Try being encouraging, try engaging them. Sometimes individuals will interact with a specific member of the family better than any others, right? So if you know that they'll talk to grandpa more than anybody else in the family, then let grandpa talk to him, right? Whoever that is. That would be my suggestion on that.
So the only thing I would say is there's a huge difference between trying to manage a situation and trying to control it, much like you were just saying. I would encourage you to ask questions and find that common ground as a first line response. Find out why they're not wanting it. And sometimes refusing is the only perceived control the individual might have. They can dig their heels in and refuse, where they're feeling out of control everywhere else. So even consider why, like what's going on that's making them feel that that's where they have to be. So I'm going to tap out and hand that to you.
So I'm going to take it down level because I'm kind of first line of defense, right? When there are certain symptoms that come up, the first kind of idea is to go to therapy and try that. So I would say I don't see much refusal, but the lack of control is really, really big. And so what I would say is taking it down. At our practice, you'll notice that I'm dressed in jeans and have tennis shoes on, and you don't know this, but like I listen to Machine Gun Kelly and do things that teenagers do so I can relate to them, or the perception of relating to them. And so even if somebody doesn't want to go to therapy, give them the option of, okay, this is your control. Here's what you get to control is try this person, right? And if this person isn't the fit, let's try someone different, right? Still give them that control, but hopefully they'll pick somebody or talk to somebody. But I don't see a ton of refusal on my end.
And, yeah, I would say too that in some cases, if a child comes to school, comes to Hope, and they verbally say, something that makes anyone concerned that they may be thinking about harming themselves or somebody else, we're going to need to try to work together with the family and try to get them in to see somebody as soon as possible. And we do have some resources where we can make a phone call and make an appointment, or at least have the family, like a mental health facility who can be expecting the child and family to come and work with them where they are. And that would be basically the next step to go, would be to try to get them in to see somebody right away if they are seriously talking about self-harm or suicide. If it's a thing where and we try to determine, the level of the intensity. It may be that they might have said something in class out of frustration, and it was not necessarily a serious consideration. And that's something as counselors we try to discern and work with. Of course, we're still going to call you all and try to work that situation, because anytime anyone makes those kind of comments, it's a serious thing. It's not something that people would just say, many people don't say it just flippantly and nonchalantly, there's usually something going on. But if they thought about, you might ask them, have you ever thought about how you might kill yourself or harm yourself? And they have an idea, that escalates it up another level, because if they've actually thought through how they might commit suicide, then that is something you need to go ahead and just, like the officer was saying, when they're younger, you have the ability to have them to go in, and I guess that a police officer or somebody could come to the home and help you, if that's the case.
And also, I'll just add, if they're having issues at school and they just need a moment, they can always stop by the counselor's office. I volunteer in there a lot, and there's at least 2 or 3 kids a day that'll just go in there, need a few minutes to just breathe. They might be having an issue with something. There's always a counselor on staff that's available to talk to them within the next 5-10 minutes. So tell your kids they can always stop by the counselor's office. They just need to tell their teacher first, and then they can go to the counselor's office.
And a lot of times, just giving themselves a little breathing room to de-escalate if they are having an anxious moment or a panic attack or something, can be very helpful. So know that if there's ever if they're vocalizing that to you, they're not coming to see somebody in our office, but you see it and you know that there's an issue, call us and let us figure out some ways that we can help your child when they're here. Okay. All right, here's another question. What options are there for support groups? And then it says for teens who are actively using, what are you hearing about, there's several different questions in there, but what are you hearing about how schools are handling use in the bathrooms? And I'll talk about that real quick. And what are you hearing about Delta 8? Is that a substance?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's what I was talking about.
Gotcha. Okay. But as far as our situation here, please know that if we had unlimited resources, we'd have somebody in the bathroom making sure kids aren't vaping every single second of every single day. That is not what we currently have. And so we are doing the best that we can to monitor the bathrooms and try to catch the kids. The vaping is the big thing right now. Seems like every week somebody is getting caught in there either vaping or having one on them. So the word is out. The kids know. We are looking. We are trying to actively monitor that. And if they get caught, they are going to unfortunately have some consequences that are going to probably involve out-of-school suspension. And if the student is, in that situation where they are facing some disciplinary action, again, that's another conversation about maybe we need to be figuring out why is it so necessary for you to have to use while you're in school, because that if it's a nicotine thing, that can help them with their anxiety. Maybe they will go see somebody and try to work on that in that way to try to help reduce that behavior. All right, I will turn it over to y'all. So, what are Delta 8?
So I'm definitely going to give this to the more professionals on the drug piece, but the Delta 8 is what I was speaking to as the carts that they're buying at gas stations. It's also sold at CBD stores that I'm aware of, but that's what the Delta 8 is.
So these synthetics, and I will admit I'm not a narcotics expert. Synthetics have been around for a long time, and basically it has been a way for people that want to get high to try to circumvent the laws. And they become dangerous because in many cases, what they're trying to do is they're trying to alter the chemical compounds at their base level so that they don't meet the legal definition of that substance under the law, right? And that goes into chemistry that's way beyond my ability to even remotely explain. But that's the underlying attempt. So what they're doing is they're taking for example, THC, which is what causes the euphoria and the high with marijuana. They're taking the THC and they're trying to alter it chemically so that legally the people that manufacture it can say it's not THC. And while this allows them to do that, and again, they kind of skirt that fine line between legal and not legal, which means that they get away with selling it in these stores, it also creates a double-edged sword because when you start altering those compounds, they start having all kinds of weird reactions. And they don't understand that you can make it more potent. You can take a drug that would normally cause someone to mellow to become violent and aggressive. And there's plenty of stories out there related to individuals engaging in horrendous acts under the influence of the various synthetics. It's been bath salts. There's various synthetic marijuanas that have been out for years. Delta 8, I'm not very well versed on that chemically. You might be able to answer a little bit more on that, but
Yeah, it's just another synthetic.
yeah,
It's just another.
it's just another way to
Get rid of one
scope
and
the law.
so.
Yeah. So, and there's always kind of a lag. They identify these substances, and then the laws catch up. They outlaw that particular formulation of it, and then they just change it. You know, they move something chemically and skirt the line, and the process starts all over again. I would say the key to these types of things is, again, it goes back to parental supervision. And I know that as you know, your children move into the teenage years, it's hard to be there every single moment of the day, right? But this stuff is hidden in their rooms, okay? That's your house. I need a warrant to go in there, you don't. You have the warrant of mom and dad, right? And if you think your kid is using this stuff, or you get a call from the principal's office, hey, we found a vape on your kid today. Yeah, before you go pick them up, I'd toss that room. I'd toss it, go through everything. And again, you're not gonna like it, but this is where these things continue on, right? And it starts with the experimentation in high school because it's cool, or they're trying to, self-medicate for anxiety or depression, or they're trying to fit in, or whatever it is. If it's left unchecked, it becomes worse, right? And that's your role as parents. You are that check and that balance to make sure that, okay, they had this one little episode, let's put an end to it.
I just want to add a little something about the Delta 8 is that, first of all, those carts, they look very different. They can look very different, but they also do look like vapes. They look like, some of them look like USBs. So if you think that your child is using nicotine but not Delta 8, weed, whatever, they look similar often. And then there are nicotine tests out there if you want to test. Also, Delta 8, I believe, it's been a long time since I've taken chemistry, but I believe the drug tests that test for marijuana test for Delta 9, but I think that Delta 8 will be picked up also. It just might not be as, you know this?
Yeah, I'm in the medical field.
Okay.
Delta 8 and Delta 9 both will show, most likely, on a urine drug screen. But a lot of the other synthetic marijuanas will not show. We see them in the ERs, high on something, but we don't know what because we can't test for it.
Super scary.
That's the scary part with the synthetics.
Yeah. And then to add about the support groups, that is a very kind of broad question. There are support groups for everything, so it depends on what the issue is, and there's a ton of different, just ask Ms. Shearstone, one of the other counselors, myself, anybody up here, there are resources out there. It just depends on what type of support group you're looking for, if you want it to be mixed gender, all one gender, what age, what area of town, so we could get a little bit more specific about that. Yep.
The first support group we tend to send people to, especially families, is NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness. Cobb County has a chapter. Most places have chapters across the country. If you just type in NAMI in your search engine, you can find it. They support. It's run by families of people that have gone through mental health issues, and they can help educate other family members on what mental illness is, and they're usually local, so they can talk about what's in the area to help support you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so here's a question. What are some strategies we can use to effectively address our child's experimentation with alcohol alone while playing video games? definitely call your counselor, call your school counselor, or if you're an adult child, you would need to possibly, you could still get in touch with somebody in our office, and we can try to help connect you with somebody to try to help that person get some help for that. There would be, I guess, possibly underlying things. Why are they choosing to do the gaming alone and using the alcohol, all of those things? Is it because they're depressed? Is it because of the anxiety and having all the things that have been going on in society and everything? That would be, I think, a good way. Just give us a call and let us see what we can do to help and talk through that with you. Okay. There's one more.
We got some questions about that.
Okay. There's one here. Will you talk about teen depression relationship screens and how to mitigate it? So that's why I pulled up this site. It's a program running. I think it's a really good resource for families that are dealing with screen industry with their kids. It's called Screenagers. There's a documentary that was done in the local area. They had some screenings of this program that addressed the issue of social media and how it's impacting our kids. There was a second one, the next chapter was made, and so the creators of these documentaries have put together some really great resources that I think if you wanted to pull some of them up and read through them, they would probably help you on how to help mitigate the situation for your own child. Okay, questions from the audience?
Just saw a couple questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you kind of already answered it with the alcohol question. So if a teen wants a drug test, your teen, what would be your first step?
So the question is, if your teen failed the drug test, what would be our first step? That I would, like we said, I would probably be having a conversation about the usage, why they're choosing to do that, and try to get them in with somebody, talk to a local counselor to address some of those concerns and why they may be using.
I would agree with that, but add what they're feeling, let's add some coping skills in there to try and not do that, right? Like, why are they doing drugs? Why did they fail it? It's a very different situation when someone fails a drug test one time because they went to a party and experimented versus they are drinking in their room alone at 3 a.m. So I would say the why behind it, as well as then getting them some coping skills to be able to deal with whatever feelings that they're dealing with, if there are feelings involved.
Have questions?
I have a second question. Is there anywhere in North Metro that teens can go to learn about what drugs can do to them and how drugs react with them? Obviously, there's a zillion videos on YouTube they don't want to watch. Is there any kind of program you could send teens to where they learn, particularly about fentanyl and benzodiazepines and opioids and synthetic marijuana?
I would say if they are caught at school using something like that, they do make them have an option to attend what they call a GRIPS program, which is a program like that that teaches them about the dangers and how that can escalate.
They're required to take health at some
That
point. I'm
has it.
assuming it would be
Yeah,
covered in the health
health
class,
I'm
but
not talking about punitive programs where you're in trouble. I'm sentencing you to go to this program.
Okay.
I'm talking about where a parent could send an angel of a child to a kid, or a kid's in a lot of trouble, any child to a program and learn about what drugs do to your brain and the effects of drugs, other than just YouTube videos and talking about it. There's no program like that. Because I don't know if I
I do not know of one.
I mean, that's a great question.
It is.
I think sometimes kids just need other kids they can relate to talk to, right? And it seems like we don't have a lot of mentoring programs out there that maybe, like I have a couple of daughters that are adolescent daughters, right? I worry about them more than I worry about boys, to be honest with you. I think boys slap upside the head tends to fix some things sometimes, but girls are like, I don't know, it's a mess. All the stuff that they're going through right now. It just seems like they need mentors. Older girls that have it together that can kind of relay that, hey, the world's not coming to an end because the right people didn't sit with you at lunch or something like that. What is there out there like that helps these kids just kind of relate?
That's one where, support groups, those are where you might have some kids who are in a group for whatever need they have, and they can learn from the kids who have been in that group a little longer, who may have learned some good skills, and then can mentor that newer person that came into the group recently. So that might be, that we could try to find and help people with that. But as far as mentoring programs, yeah, that would be pretty helpful. Yes?
You mentioned lending more money available to try and help or maybe things like this or education from the government, but you didn't want the government involved. What have you seen in other communities that parents or schools have gotten, like you're saying, these programs together?
Kentucky, I mean, honestly, I talked with the Lieutenant Governor of Kentucky this morning, and I have a meeting with them next week. They have an amazing youth-led coalition where they're working in public school districts to combat this stuff. And one of their breakout sessions was all the kids. They had one adult that was in there taking notes, and they came up with a lot of solutions for their school. I just got the PowerPoint on that this morning as an advance for our meeting next week to learn more about that. And I think that was pass-through funding from one of our grants. We do block grant funding. We have a $9.7 billion budget with about 640 employees. And I can tell you I'm not rich, so most of that money goes out into the communities. Georgia, I want to say, gets $300+ million a year. We don't tell the state what to do with that money. So as you guys vote and you make friends with people in the community, I would push back on the state of Georgia to find out why some of that money's not going into behavioral health in schools.
And at a local level, who does those grants or start like?
The state of Georgia through DVHDD puts it out however they want to. We don't dictate how they spend that money, and it's $300+ million a year.
But, okay, so like say Kentucky, you said that was a grant that they got.
I think some of that was pass-through funding, so the same thing. It went through our block grant funds. We fund behavioral health, we fund mental health block grant, and we fund a substance abuse-related block grant to the state. We just give to the state of Georgia, the state of Kentucky, all of our 8 states. They decide at the state level where that money goes. So in Kentucky, they chose to spend some of that money in the schools. Where is that in Georgia?
I lived in Oregon, and they had, like you said, support groups,
Right.
mentors, things at school, and I could say my son included and his friends, they are using, they don't know where to go, parents don't know where to go. If you don't have money, they cannot get into programs. There is a loss of resources for sure.
So maybe that's something we need to fix. Like, this is not normally my thing. I'm the first to say. So I'm enjoying being here, honestly. This is great. But it's one of those things where it starts at the grassroots level, right? I mean, we fund a lot of things. We don't actually do them. We just throw the money out there toward it. But I mean, maybe we need to start something, right? Maybe we need to get in contact with, I know Judy Fitzgerald, the commissioner, is leaving. She announced her retirement, but maybe it's time when the new person comes in, we start letting them know how we feel. And get something going. And anything that you start is better than nothing. So, yeah, we'll have to talk about that.
I'll just add on something to that. Through PTA is an advocacy group for students first. That's the main goal. There's always an advocacy day at the Capitol. And it's that exact kind of thing that we do to go down there and to talk to the legislators in person to say, hey, you guys need to address this. And maybe some PTAs, at a council or state level could work with a legislator to create some kind of law or funding, to work together. So, please do. I'm the president of PTA that's doing all the wonderful work, but
Yeah,
it's a
definitely.
good way to get involved.
Reach out to me if you're interested, the one that was asking the question. We need help too, like they're saying they're short on resources. We are too. We were both just co-presidents, and then she got stepped up to president, and we need chairs for everything.
And that's just
Or
the sort of thing
help,
that if you're
or
passionate
support.
about, you can go talk to.
And we'll help you.
We're not even co-parents, but we're so glad that we're hosting this, that we heard about it.
Oh, wait, what school?
So thank you.
We'll bring it back to your school, and I'm happy to pass on our resources to you guys too. And thank you for coming. Thank you guys all for coming.
I do think it's a shame that we focus so much on treatment and not prevention. And I think you're starting to see a shift. If there was anything that that's positive on the behavioral health side that came from COVID. It is I think on the federal side, for me, it feels like a bullseye on mental health right now because everybody's wanting to talk about mental health, but there's a spotlight on it, and there's been a need for that for, gosh, decades. And I'll be the first to tell you, and I've never told this in front of a group of people, I am a product of the juvenile justice system. I was incarcerated at 15 and served house arrest halfway through my 16th birthday. So I didn't, when I was depressed, I didn't turn to substances, I acted out, I did other stuff. And I had done it for a long time and hadn't gotten caught. My parents to this day still don't want to know what all I was doing at 13 and 14. We've talked about that, like just let that go. So, I mean, if I'd gotten some help early on, we moved 14 times, and back then you didn't talk about feeling bad, right? So I think prevention is definitely a key thing that we need to focus on.
I know time, you have another
So,
comment?
I mean, 100% agree with you. We need more prevention. And most of our kids, I think, are in high school already. I've witnessed, 3 kids go through the elementary, middle, and high school level, and it seems like a lot of it is starting in the middle school. And I know we talked a little bit about the bathrooms. Back in the middle school, I unfortunately learned that a lot of it, especially the girls, were being kind of indoctrinated into like vaping, for example, in the middle school bathrooms. You go in, the cool girls are in there, they're vaping. If you want to be cool, try this. They're giving it to them. Has there ever been any thought of, and I realize the schools do not have the resources for this, but parent volunteers in the bathrooms? Because I'm telling you, I would seriously take a week off every year and sit in a bathroom. And I think probably most parents in here would.
That's a wonderful suggestion that.
The downside of it is, it's not going to stop them. If they can't get it in the bathroom, they're going to get it in somewhere else.
Behind the bleachers.
So, in addition to kind of preventing them from easily securing it in the school, the mentoring idea that somebody else came up with, especially, maybe some of the high school kids, starting to mentor the middle school kids. You don't want to get involved in this, if there was some kind of a program where we could match up kids, almost like a big brother, big sister type thing, but more for the mental health and substance abuse type of thing.
Yeah, I would say that we do in Cobb County, we have a program called Sources of Strength that is a peer-to-peer kind of leadership program. So that we just basically went through this. We had about 50 kids who were nominated by the staff to be trained in looking out for signs of, that someone, yourself or your friend is struggling, and then how then they can encourage themselves or their friend to seek out help with a trusted adult, anyone, either a family member or somebody in the building. And then that is also going on in middle schools. There are programs there as well, so there is that going on. But I hear what you're saying; it's not necessarily tied to the drug, but those are typically things that kids are going to bring up and say, my friend Johnny is really struggling, and I'm really worried about them, and then we would jump in as counselors and try to have a conversation and find out what's going on.
Because what I'm also seeing is that the kids, and again, I have 2 boys and a girl, and I don't see this as much of a problem with the boys as I do with the girls, that they don't have trusted adults. They don't trust any adults. They don't trust their parents. They don't trust their teachers. They trust their friends, who are the ones introducing them to these wonderful behaviors, and getting them to find that. Their friends are not going to say, hey, you need to go talk to somebody. The friends are saying, you can't trust any adults.
I would say that,
It's a real,
yeah.
so that's why I'm kind of saying, starting at that, the high schoolers with the middle
Yeah.
schoolers,
Coming down.
to bridge that really dangerous portion of time where they're so vulnerable to this stuff.
Yes, yes. I was gonna say, we do try to get kids from all the different, groups. Maybe you'll have kids that are nominated that are in the band, or there are some kids that are, kind of those, arty type kids that you want to, that's the idea is that there's some kids who are being trained to identify and help, somebody that they might know and talk to get them to talk to somebody. And if that kid is not gonna do it, they're trained to go to that, whoever their trusted adult, and we train them to pick that person, and they go there, and then the cycle starts.
I mean, that's
and they
great.
can
I
bring
think we
us
need
to us.
more of it.
Yeah.
It needs to be like really accessible.
And again, funding would be just lovely, please. All right. Any other questions? I'm going late. Okay, I just wanted to point out that on our school counseling page, we go to the resources, we do have our social emotional support link, that can good work. Some things here, crisis information, the 811 and all of the 988, I'm sorry. But down here we put some of the resources that I thought would be good for you all to be able to go back to if you wanted to read through any of these. And at the top, there was, I'm trying to think, down at the bottom, that's what it is. There's references to that 988 resource line. So just remember there's resources there that you can also go to reach to and access some great talking points and things to help you with talking with the kids. Okay.
Well, thank you guys all for coming. Thank you guys, everyone, for coming. We appreciate you supporting us. We can help. We have all the resources, and feel free to come up if you want to ask, one of our panelists a question. Thank you.
Have you heard of peer leadership?
Which one is your program?
Right now, the county. So basically,
Sorry to just point that.
no, trust me, so I wrote a